Yo guys, welcome back. Don't worry, I'm not going to be playing more of this Morocco game. This is going to be a video talking about the happiness system because I already see a lot of people commenting about it on like forums, Discord and stuff, complaining about it, and I do understand why that is happening, but I'm also quite sure that not many people really understand the system that well. And I know, to be honest, I thought I did, and when I actually looked at it properly, I didn't really. And it definitely helped me a lot once I did, I think. So I'm going to try and go through everything that I understand about the system in terms of just how it actually works. Not necessarily, all the strategies for dealing with it, but just like how the mechanics of it actually work to give the scenarios that people are having happen to them in games, where they may end up suddenly going crazily unhappy when they were fine before, or just struggling with it in general. So yes, this is from the save when Morocco Game had just finished, and let's have a little look at the happiness first. So we will do the local happiness first. So each city has its own particular happiness. Now, puppeted cities, which we have none of, but puppeted cities have no happiness. Like, it's just zero, always. Unless you're playing as Venice, then their puppets are allowed to have local happiness. Resisting cities. So if you use an Inquisitor or if you just conquered a city, you get those turns of resistance. They also have zero happiness. So until they stop resisting, and then you need to build the courthouse as well. So until you've built the courthouse, you will also have zero happiness in a city that you've conquered. So resisting or occupied cities, zero happiness. Now all of your other non-puppet cities can have happiness up to the population, which is where it is capped. So this one is up to 22. We've got 41 here because that's the population. And the first thing that's considered is the local happiness. So that's stuff like from buildings, I guess wonders and stuff like that. And like there's quite a few policies that give. So this one gives happiness, that will be local. There's ones that give happiness from buildings, like one happiness from castles. That will be local happiness. I think circuses just give happiness generally. Maybe like zoos and stuff like that. Maybe not. I don't know. Circuses. Maybe it is just circus that gives the plus happiness. But yeah, so first thing that happens is your local happiness is added up in the city. Then, in every city, then the global happiness is taken into account, and that's from stuff like, I guess it's mostly from luxuries. Then you can have others from stuff like, I think some of the religious beliefs, like we actually have one here, the Reformation belief, plus one happiness for every 2 cities following this religion. I'm pretty sure that is global. And I think there are some other beliefs as well that will be global. And the global happiness is basically distributed between all of your cities, and it's done like one at a time. So they should generally get equal amounts, but it only goes up to the cap. So I don't know how much local happiness we have here. I guess we can figure it out that it's the bottom 3 ones. So 12, 23, and then the rest of the 18 comes from the global. And it will be similar for these other cities, where they will all be put up to 22, or to whatever their pop is, with the global. I think there might be one city where we're not at the cap, so that's this one, where there wasn't enough spare happiness left to get this one up to 24 pop as well. So if I buy a luxury now, that will give us some more global happiness that can be distributed anywhere where we don't already have happiness up to the population. So if I buy a luxury from, for example, Portugal, now that has now sorted out the unhappiness in these two cities, which I think were the ones that weren't getting enough to put them up to the cap. So they are now also capped. So the global happiness has gone through, given it to all the cities, but we actually have some spare now. And basically, spare happiness is literally just not counted, because the way that this global number is given is by counting up all of the total happinesses in each city. And because there was no more spaces for the happiness, we didn't actually get all of the happiness. So you can see we're on 279 here. And it says 139 from controlled luxuries. If I actually buy another one... This 279 has not changed at all, even though where it says the happiness from luxuries, that has increased. So it's one thing to bear in mind that you can only basically get happiness up to the amount of population you have in each city. I don't think there's any way to have more than that. Yeah, I think it's a bit weird, but that is how it works. So I've seen people sometimes saying how things aren't working for giving them happiness. That's probably the case where they were already capped everywhere. And this can actually happen pretty often in games, I would say. Yes, where you will be capped in all your cities on happiness, and the extra happiness won't be making any difference. And then all you can really do to actually sort out your happiness is try and make sure that your unhappiness isn't above the happiness that you have. Yeah, so it's local first, then global. I guess global happiness is technically better because it can be distributed to all of your cities. The thing that can happen sometimes is if you have more than your population in just local happiness, then it'll be kind of wasted, the extra that you have, because it won't be distributed. I guess you could say in some cases you might want to have the local happiness in a particular city to make sure that that one doesn't become unhappy or something. Like if one of your cities has to be, you might want to choose that it would be a different one. Potentially, but generally global happiness is a bit better just because there are some cases where you could have too much local happiness in one city. I guess particularly in a tradition capital, if you build all the natural wonders there with this policy, you might end up with more local happiness than your population. Yeah, that's pretty much it for happiness though. Unhappiness is a lot more complicated. So, okay, we'll start again with resisting unoccupied cities. They will have right up to their population in unhappiness, just always. So again, cities where they're either in resistance or if you don't have if you've captured them and you don't build the courthouse yet, they'll just have full unhappiness. So they'll have no happiness, full unhappiness. Puppet cities get 1 happiness for every 4 population. I think it's rounded down. And again, no happiness. Now, in all of your other cities, most happiness from most sources is also capped at the population. And it is done in kind of an order in which they are calculated. So if we're hovering over this unhappiness breakdown here, and it's done in the order that it goes down the list that you can see. But above the list, if we had war weariness, that would be at the top. I don't know exactly how that's calculated, but obviously the more war weariness you have, the more unhappiness you'll have, and it's kind of done in each city, I think. We actually have a little bit of war weariness right now. Oh no, we don't. Okay, thought we did. But yeah, no unhappiness from war weariness, otherwise it would be showing up at the top. Then there's unhappiness from pillaged tiles. That is 1 unhappiness for every 2 pillaged tiles. Then come these yield, the need modifier stuff. And gonna have to go into this in a bit more detail, but we'll just go through the order now. So it's distress, poverty. Then there is another one which is connections, which goes in between poverty and the religious unrest that you can see there. And that is if your city doesn't have a connection to your capital, so it doesn't have this symbol. Or sometimes if you have a caravan, that will also mean that you won't get the unhappiness. So if this city wasn't connected, but it had a caravan, I think going to any city, then you wouldn't have the unhappiness from, it's called isolation. And that is 1 unhappiness for every 3 pop, if the city is not connected. Then we have this religious unrest. So that is 1 for every 2 religious minority citizens. However, there are some other modifications to it. So we actually have 8 citizens, which are not a majority here, but it gets like decreased as well. So that's just the base amount, it's 1 for every 2. Then illiteracy, so science below the needs, culture below the needs is boredom. That is the final one, and it is done in that order. And these are all done, so they do 1 by 1 until it reaches the cap, and then it stops showing them. So it doesn't necessarily make a difference in terms of which one's more important, because if you have any sort of unhappiness, it means the same thing, really. It just means that sometimes you may not really be aware that you have that unhappiness is further down the list, because you've already reached your cap with the first ones. So you can actually see here that on the boredom, we have 3 from boredom, but it says actual 11 reduced by 7. So that should be 4, but because there was only 3 left after all the other ones were done, the 6, 2 and 11, which made 19, there was only 3 left, so we only have 3 from boredom. So yeah, it only makes a difference in terms of which unhappiness actually shows up, especially when you look here. So I've seen people particularly complaining about distress, and the reason that might be happening is because distress is obviously right at the top of the list. You will almost always have distress unless you have crazy war weariness or the pillage tiles. Oh shit, I forgot about famine. Okay, starvation actually comes after war weariness, before pillaging, and that is so also before distress, and that's 1 unhappiness for every food like below 0 you are. So if you got less food than's being eaten. But yeah, so distress will almost always appear if it is there because it's near the top. Whereas boredom, because it's right at the bottom, even though it might be there, it might not actually be showing up because you already reached the cap from the other unhappinesses. But if you want a city to not be unhappy, you will need to, get rid of all forms of it. So like there's probably quite a few cities we have, like this one. So we've got 8 from distress, 13 from illiteracy. But if we actually reduce the distress, it would not do anything because we would just end up with more illiteracy instead. And we only don't have it now because we're already at the cap. And that is how most of them work. Then though there is the matter of urbanization, which is basically separate, and urbanization can go above the cap. So it's just like not counted in comparison to any of the others. And urbanization is each city allows a certain amount of specialists, and certain buildings give you more. Like this artist guild, 1 specialist, no longer produces unhappiness from urbanization. A library as well. I think a garden, and there's some policies also, like burgers. 1 specialist in each city no longer produces unhappiness from urbanization. I think we have 4 specialists here. I'm pretty sure we're at the cap in terms of how many citizens we can have as specialists. So 1 more, has given us 1 urbanization, and it's 1 unhappiness for every extra citizen. So another one, that's given us 2 urbanization. Well, our unhappiness actually didn't go up because we got rid of 1 illiteracy there. But you can see we're above the cap here. So another one, we've got another one above the cap as well. So urbanization is really quite important that you don't have, because there will be a lot of situations in games where you will be capped on unhappiness, and if you have an extra unhappiness from urbanization, that will be the difference between putting your city from being happy, which is where they're both equal, to being unhappy when you have more unhappiness than happiness. And unfortunately, this is one of the reasons you kind of do have to do like manual specialist control, because when you put it on non-manual, I mean, only because I've changed it. Okay, yes, it actually did. So it's put like 5 specialists in there, so now we're 2 over the cap, which is a very big deal, because there's a lot of empires you can get away with being capped in all the cities, just as long as you don't have urbanization and as long as you're also capped on happiness. But if you have urbanization everywhere, it's gonna generally mean you're unhappy. The other annoying thing about urbanization is that it actually happens in puppeted cities, and you can't necessarily see it when you mouse over it, because it will just show the unhappiness from puppets, but you will see it up here and it will be included in your total unhappiness. And that's so specialists being worked in puppeted cities over the urbanization amount. Very annoying one that basically makes puppets really bad. So yeah, worth keeping an eye on for that. I've kind of come to the consideration that puppets are sometimes not worth having actually because of that. But yeah, that is that. Now, we need to go more detail on these needs modifier stuff, because this is pretty damn complicated. So distress, poverty, illiteracy and boredom we're talking about here. So this is how your unhappiness from these sources is calculated. Okay, firstly, there's a global median calculated for each of the yields. And when it says median, it actually does mean median. It's done by putting every city in the world in order of like each of the yields, and then it actually takes to the 55th percentile, so it's a little bit above the median. But it's like if there was 100 cities and they were in ascending order, it would be the 55th one. And it takes that city's, so it's done as the yields per population. So for distress, I know it may not look like it from that symbol, but what distress actually means is food plus production. So it finds the median food plus production per population, and that is what's considered as the global median. And then for poverty, it's just gold per population, literacy, science per population, and boredom, culture per population. Now, once the median has been found, it's then modified by the factors which you can see below. So, there's the technology one, plus 121%. That increases as the game goes on, as you get more techs. It's done as like a percentage of the total techs, and it caps out at 150% when you have all techs researched. Then you have city size. It's actually a minus 0.5 per population. Not hugely significant, but there we go. And then empire size. And empire size is actually, so it's 9% for every non-puppet city that you have. So, we currently have 11 cities. It doesn't include the capital as well. So it basically counts as 10 times 9, which is 90. But then, empire size, kind of weirdly, is actually reduced by some buildings as well. So on castles and walls and arsenals and stuff, you can see it says Empire Needs modifier reduced by 5% in this city, and that basically means it reduces the empire size penalty thing. Bit weird, but that's what the Empire Needs modifier thing means, and I think Public Works also reduces that by 10%. So yeah, and then there's also a 25% for a capital. So the empire size thing is different in each city, and that's because it's 90 minus whatever the modifiers we have from, Public Works and all the walls and stuff is as well. Okay. Just ignore the fact that the technology one is different for the moment. We'll come to that. Then below that is the total needs modifiers. So that's the added up of all the needs factors, and then minus any other modifiers that you have, which can be from quite a few things. So again, Public Works. After it says Empire Needs modifiers, it then says modifiers for distress, poverty, illiteracy, and boredom. That's what that bit of it means. And then I think maybe there's some wonders, definitely, and some policies that will reduce individual ones. So this one reduces poverty in all cities. What else is there? There's definitely some wonders as well. I think like East India Company. Again, another minus 10% poverty in all cities. So they are then taken into account, and then that gives the total amount, which is... So the minus 50% is all of the negative things there, and then the total amount for each of them is to the left of it. So it's the global median plus whatever modifier is shown in the total needs modifier thing. And then that's the amount that you actually need to not have unhappiness from that particular source. And it will show you like where your yields are in comparison to the yields that you're supposed to have in each of the things. So distress, you can see it says total deficit, and on illiteracy and boredom, and then for poverty we're actually above the amount that we need. So then the actual happiness is worked out, and that is, so for distress it's 1 unhappiness for every 0.7 you are below the yields per population. Gold is 0.6 for every... is 1 for every 0.6 you are below the yields per population. Science for every 0.4, and culture for every 0.5. Basically means like science is a little bit more, like you'll get more unhappiness for each however much you are below the amount that you're supposed to be at, compared to distress where you're not penalised quite so heavily, though it can be quite easy to be a long way below the distress one, so we will still often get a reasonable amount of that. And then next to that, so that gives the actual, and then the reduced by 6 is from basically buildings and maybe some other policy sources and stuff. There's quite a few buildings that reduce the individual things, like armory, barracks reducing distress. I think markets reduce poverty. Oh, they don't. Well, the other ones do. Custom house reduce poverty. So yeah, you get the actual, take away any flat reductions, and then it just depends if there's actually spare unhappiness in the city, whether you get that unhappiness or not. I hope that all makes sense, but that is not all. So the other thing about this is that the global median and the needs factors, so the top 3 things there, they only update when your population grows. So, for all the time that we've been on 22 pop, the global median was found when we reached 22 pop, and then we're still using that same global median to determine what yields we need. And we're also still using the needs factors that we had at that moment. So the technology that we were on, the empire size that we were on. Yes, however, the other modifiers, they actually change in real time. So if you build more public works that give the minus 15% to each, that will continue to be applied like each turn, as opposed to just when the population grows. And this is a pretty big deal, because if you avoid growth in a city and it doesn't grow for ages, you end up still using the same global median that was taken ages ago. So your yields will gradually increase, but the global median that you're comparing to will stay the same. So this is often a very good way of getting rid of basically all of your unhappiness over time in a certain city. And also, so as I was saying, the needs factors won't increase, so as you're getting more technology or if you're conquering more cities. But the percentage modifiers will be still applied, any extra ones you get, and pretty much all of those are negative. So, like I said, any public works that you build will continue to decrease the amount that you need. So it really works in a lot of ways to reduce your unhappiness. It's very weird, to be honest, but that is just how the system works. So I mentioned about the technology earlier. You can see here it says 121%. However, in the capital, it says 123%, and that's because this city grew later when we had an extra tech, so the modifier was slightly increased. So, yes, funnily enough, I actually have a very good example of this, because I locked this city on this turn when I was playing, because I was just about to go to war, and I wanted to basically have spare happiness in my empire so that I could conquer new cities, because I mentioned about the resistance, you just get unhappiness and no happiness from those cities, so you do need some spare happiness left so that you don't go unhappy if you want to conquer. So I actually locked all of my cities apart from my capital, and their unhappiness gradually went down. So let's have a look at the same city 11 turns later. Okay, here we are. So look at Fez again, and we are down to 1 unhappiness, and that's from religious unrest. Pretty crazy. So it does say the empire size has gone up, but I don't think that's actually been applied to the needs modifiers. So we're still using the same median that we were those turns ago. I think we have some extra minus reductions from maybe a public works or 2 that I've built, and our yields have gone up because we've got, new techs and stuff. I think we might have built a power station in that time. So we've basically caught up with all of the things that we needed, which means that we have no unhappiness here anymore. Pretty crazy. But if I was to let this city grow now, you can actually see it says at the bottom what our happiness is going to be if we let the city grow, and it's going to be 6 distress and 15 illiteracy. And wow, that's actually not even bad. Oh, no. I think what that basically means is it's calculating that we would reach the cap, basically. Maybe if I stop working this. Yeah. So we would reach the unhappiness cap straight away if we grew this city, because it would use the new medians and the new empire size after we've conquered some more cities in this time, and the new tech modifier as well, which will be higher because we've got more techs. So, yes, what I'm basically saying is you can use avoid growth to kind of freeze the amounts that you need in your city to in the past so that you can actually catch up. The downside is that you kind of will have to leave this on forever unless I want to suddenly get another 21 unhappiness. And the reason why the happiness system is so hard to not have unhappiness with generally is that all of these need factors go up so much throughout the game, especially towards the end. So the technology thing goes up to plus 150%. Empire size will usually be 50 or more. So that means just to be at the thresholds that you're supposed to be at, you're expected to be at plus 200% of the global median by the end of the game, which is obviously just never going to happen. Yeah, you do get some of the flat reductions, but it's not enough to take into account the amounts that you're supposed to be meeting to not have unhappiness. So it kind of is impossible to meet the need thresholds at the end of the game, is what I'm trying to say. Especially when you start conquering, you'll notice that the amounts you're supposed to hit becomes pretty crazy, and your unhappiness from all sources gets pretty bad. So they're kind of you can sometimes meet them in the capital though. If you've got wonders and stuff, it is sometimes possible to actually meet the thresholds. And obviously if you build some public works, because they do actually reduce it by basically 25% each time. But the best way to manage it is to try and just make sure that you have full happiness as well. So even if you have full unhappiness, you're still okay because you have the same amount of happiness. And if you know you're going to be getting some unhappiness which can't have happiness with it, so for example here we've just got 32 unhappiness, then you will have to kind of plan ahead and do the locking city thing to give yourself a bit of extra room so that you can stay reasonably happy. But meeting the needs thresholds by the end of the game is basically just not going to happen unless you're 20 techs ahead of everyone else or 20 techs ahead of the global median, so you can just have way extra yields. Even if your empire's small, you're still expected to have plus 150%. Very, very difficult to have. I guess there is one other thing, which is these processes, because not only do they give you more of the yield, but they also reduce the culture need for arts, and then science need for research and whatever. And you can see it down on the culture need thing, it's minus 95%. And if I change it to research, it went to minus 70%, and science need went to minus 75%. So they're obviously good ways of trying to reach it, but you can only do them temporarily, and it's not going to help you with all the other ones. Yeah, that's pretty much it, I guess. I guess I can show the fact that we do have urbanization here from this puppet city. Oh, it does even show up here. So 4, 1 for every 4 population, and then 1 from being over the urbanization cap, even though it's a puppet, which obviously sucks. And I'm sure we'll get plenty of urbanization here from this puppeted city. Very, very not cool indeed. Wow, we're actually not even capped on happiness here. So I could buy a resource and it would actually help a little bit. Got a flipping urbanization here. So yeah, Point is, as long as you don't have urbanization and you're at happiness cap, you can stay happy even with full unhappiness. If you want to have spare happiness so that you're not at your cap in late game, you're going to have to do some locking cities. I don't think there's much way around it unless you're going to build like 10 public works in every city. If you're not conquering though, it should be reasonable to keep your happiness as high as your unhappiness. I guess just quickly we'll go over the penalties for unhappiness, just to be clear about what they are. So if you're unhappy globally, so below 50%, or happiness is less than unhappiness by a bit, so this is down to 35% is the next level, so between 35 and 50, minus 25% growth, minus 25% production for units plus settlers, so military units and settlers. I guess I'll go to a different save. Okay, so here we're a little bit unhappy. Like I said, between 35 and 50%, and basically means we have a happiness modifier there, which is minus 25%. So minus 25% to growth, and minus 25% to unit production as well. You can see it at the bottom there. And that is because we're globally slightly unhappy. Okay, now we're below 35%, so that means minus 75% to growth from the unhappiness modifier. And again, on military units, minus 75% to production in military units, and it's settlers as well, or colonists is what we have now. I don't think it applies to other civilians. Nah. So just military units and settlers. I don't think these either. And not nukes either, which is quite interesting. Or buildings. Okay, then there's a local unhappiness as well. See if we can find some of that. So, yes, the way local unhappiness works is you get minus 10% growth for every extra unhappiness you have compared to happiness, and again minus 10% to the production of military units and settlers. However, they are capped, so like the total from the global and local unhappiness is capped at minus 100% for growth, and then for production it is capped at minus 75%. So we already had that just from the global, but if we didn't have the global, we still would have had them from the local unhappiness here. Global unhappiness also, so below 35% is very unhappy. What we're talking about here. You can get barbarian units spawned, you can get cities flipping to other empires, which I haven't really seen much of happening, to be honest, but apparently it can happen. Oh yeah, you do get combat effectiveness reduced, so 20% for very unhappy, 10% for unhappy. So it is not ideal if you're at war, especially if you need to make new units. And war does usually give you unhappiness, so it definitely can be a problem. And I think the costs include like buying, so buying military units and stuff is also a lot more expensive. I mean, we're over our supply cap here for good measure as well, so a lot of stuff going on in this one. Oh yeah, and then being happy will actually give you a growth positive, but that's, I guess, only if you're not globally unhappy. So local happiness, you'll get a 2% extra growth for every extra happiness you have compared to unhappiness, but only if you're happy overall. Okay, so here, yeah, we're happy again. Ooh. So because of our massive empire size, we're now way below the needs on everything. And the fact that we're full on tech, so even our capital is way below. And you can see we just have 46 distress, even though we have loads of the other ones. But for example here, we've got that nice 40% local happiness modifier to growth, and that's because of the 20 excess happiness that we have in the city. So, I mean, being happy doesn't really give you that much. It's more just obviously not having the penalties from being unhappy. And the main ones from those are the military unit and settler production. Yeah. That, I suppose, will be that. I hope that all made sense. Yeah, and I guess not going to be hugely on exact strategy here, but I would just put a general point on the strategy to not get messed up by it, which is you can try and meet the needs thresholds for a reasonable amount of the game, like maybe up to industrial or something, but once your technology modifier and in conjunction with the empire size modifier is getting up to like, plus 100% or more, you're really going to struggle to keep up. Like in your cities generally, you might be able to keep up in cities which have like loads of wonders and stuff, as long as your empire's not too big. But you will kind of have to accept that you're probably going to be near the cap in some of these other cities, and if you need them to not be unhappy, you're going to have to use avoid growth at certain times in order to make sure that your empire doesn't go unhappy, because you probably don't want that. I mean, I know the penalties aren't like necessarily the worst, but I think generally it is much better to just keep your eye on it and try and make sure that you can stay happy whenever possible. I think it makes people less likely to declare war on you and stuff like that, and you don't want like loads of factors coming at the same time where you have unhappiness problems, supply cap problems and war weariness. Maybe you're not getting much money and you've got people warring you. Better to try and keep everything nice and stable and well managed. And I hope this can help you do that. May have some more discussions about happiness in the future. And yeah, let me know if you've got any questions and stuff. And I will see you guys soon.